This happened when I was 16, about a decade ago. My older sister Rachel was 18 at the time. We were on this marathon road trip with our mom and grandparents, helping them relocate closer to family. By day 4, we were all going stir-crazy, trapped in that car for endless hours on the interstate. Somewhere in Nebraska, we pulled off at one of those forgotten little towns that time seems to have abandoned. The motel we found was called the Desert Rose Inn, one of those classic L-shaped 2-story places that screams budget accommodation. The carpet was this awful burnt orange color, threadbare in places, and everything smelled like a mixture of old cigarettes and industrial cleaner trying too hard to mask something worse. Our grandparents settled into a ground floor room near the lobby, while Mom, Rachel, and I took a room upstairs at the far end of the building. After hauling our luggage up those creaky stairs, Mom noticed our ice bucket was cracked and empty. She was exhausted and just wanted to collapse, so she asked Rachel and me to grab some ice. "No problem," Rachel said, snatching the bucket. "Come on, let's get this done." According to the little directory stuck to our door, the ice machine was downstairs. We locked our room and started down that dimly lit hallway. The fluorescent lights gave everything this sickly yellow tint, and our footsteps seemed to echo despite the thin carpeting. As we approached the stairwell, a door opened maybe 3 rooms down from ours. A man stepped out, probably late 30s, with greasy black hair slicked back and wearing this gray tank top that was way too tight. He had his room key in his hand and made a show of locking his door, but then he just stood there, watching us. No smile, no nod, no acknowledgement. Just this blank predatory stare that made my skin crawl. But you know how it is. You see all kinds of weird people in cheap motels. I tried to shake it off and kept walking. We pushed through the heavy stairwell door and our footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as we headed down. The door swung shut behind us with this solid thunk, but almost immediately, I heard it click open again. I glanced back through that little reinforced window, and there he was, the same man, slipping into the stairwell behind us. He hadn't gone into his room at all. He'd been waiting for us to pass. "Rachel," I whispered urgently. "I see him," she hissed back, picking up her pace. But here's where it gets really unsettling. We burst through the ground floor door and found ourselves in an identical hallway to the one upstairs. The ice machine sign pointed toward the opposite end of the building, what felt like a mile away. We tried to walk normally, tried not to look panicked, but I could hear those steady footsteps behind us, matching our rhythm perfectly. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't trying to catch up, he was just following, like a predator tracking prey, patient and deliberate. When we finally reached the ice machine, tucked into this little alcove next to some vending machines, Rachel jammed the bucket under the dispenser and hit the button. The machine was ancient and loud, grinding and clattering as ice tumbled out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. For about 10 seconds, that mechanical noise was the only sound in the world. When it finally stopped, the silence felt deafening. Rachel pulled out the full bucket and looked back down the hallway. Her face went completely white. "Go," she whispered. "Go now." I followed her gaze and saw him, maybe 40 feet away, just standing there watching us. The moment our eyes met, he started walking toward us again, his pace noticeably faster this time. Thank God I'd studied that little map on our door. There were stairs at both ends of the building, and we were right next to the other stairwell. Without another word, we bolted for that door, ice sloshing in the bucket as we ran. We took those concrete steps 2 at a time, our footsteps echoing like gunshots in that narrow space. Neither of us dared look back to see if he was following. We just ran. We burst back onto the second floor and sprinted down that endless hallway to our room, Rachel fumbling with the key card with shaking hands. The door finally beeped and clicked open. We dove inside, slammed it shut, and threw every lock we could find. The deadbolt, the security chain, that little swing latch near the top. We stood there gasping, backs pressed against the door, listening for any sound from the hallway. Nothing. Complete silence. "What the hell was that?" I panted. "I have no idea," Rachel said, her voice trembling, but something about that guy was seriously wrong. We told Mom what happened. She was concerned but tried to rationalize it. Maybe we'd spooked him somehow. Maybe he thought we were troublemakers. When we went down to visit our grandparents later, Grandma just waved us off dismissively. "You girls were probably being too loud," she said. "Maybe he thought you were going to cause problems." Her reaction made me feel stupid, like maybe we had overreacted, but that sick feeling in my stomach told me we hadn't. We went back to our room, double-checked all the locks, and tried to put it out of our minds. We were only staying one night anyway. How bad could it get? I was about to find out. Sometime in the dead of night, a sound ripped me from sleep. At first, I thought it was part of a nightmare, this low, heavy thudding coming from our door. My eyes snapped open in the darkness, and I saw Rachel already sitting bolt upright in her bed, terror written across her face. Mom was awake too, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. This wasn't knocking. Knocking is sharp, quick raps. This was something else entirely. Heavy, full-body impacts like someone was trying to break down the door with their shoulder. Slow, deliberate, methodical. No voice, no demands to open up. Just that relentless, terrifying pounding that seemed to shake the entire room. My blood turned to ice. It had to be him. Somehow he'd figured out which room was ours. He'd waited until the middle of the night when we'd be most vulnerable. Mom grabbed the bedside phone with shaking hands and dialed the front desk. No answer. She then fumbled for her cell phone and whispered frantically to the 911 operator, explaining that someone was trying to break into our motel room. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. We sat there frozen, hardly daring to breathe, straining to hear any sound from the hallway. Nothing. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 5 or 6 minutes before we heard crisp, authoritative knocks and a voice calling out, "Police! Is everyone okay in there?" Mom stumbled to the door, tears streaming down her face, and peered through the peephole before undoing the locks. 2 officers stood in the hallway. The corridor behind them was empty. We told them everything, from the ice machine incident to the terrifying pounding. One officer stayed with us while his partner went to check the hallways and stairwells. He returned a few minutes later, shaking his head. "Nothing out there now," he said. "Place is quiet." "He was here," Mom insisted. "He was trying to get in." The first officer nodded seriously. "Ma'am, let me talk to the night manager about getting a look at the security footage." They left, and we locked the door again. All 3 of us huddled together on one bed, too terrified to even think about sleep. About 20 minutes later, one of the officers returned, his expression grim. "You weren't imagining things," he said quietly. "We saw him on the CCTV footage, followed you girls to the ice machine, watched you run up the other stairs. Then later, we see him come right up to your door and just stand there for several minutes before he starts pounding on it." A chill ran through me. It was all real. "Did you find him?" Mom asked. "Do you know who he is?" The officer shook his head. "He went down the emergency exit at the end of the hall about 10 minutes before we arrived. The cameras don't cover that part of the parking lot. He's gone. We got a clear shot of his face, though. We'll run it through the system." He looked at all of us seriously. "Keep this door locked tight. We'll have patrol cars sweep the area throughout the night." But that was just the beginning of my encounters with the darkness that lurks along America's forgotten highways. Years later, I was on another cross-country trip, this time alone, heading to a family wedding. I was in my early 20s then, more confident, thinking I could handle whatever the road threw at me. A massive storm had rolled in across the plains, turning the highway into a crawling nightmare of near-zero visibility. Then, on a desolate stretch of Highway 89, a multi-car accident brought everything to a complete standstill. I sat in that traffic jam for hours, watching emergency vehicles arrive, seeing a helicopter land in the median to airlift someone to a hospital. By the time traffic finally cleared, I was 5 hours behind schedule. The adrenaline from witnessing the accident had long since faded, replaced by exhaustion, a pounding headache, and that weird, buzzy feeling you get from too many hours on the road. I desperately needed to stop, bathroom, shower, maybe a few hours of sleep. When I saw a weather-beaten sign for a place called the Pineview Motor Lodge, I pulled off without hesitation. It was a single-story strip of rooms flanked by dead scrub brush and cracked asphalt. Across the road sat a lonely diner with a flickering open sign. Otherwise, nothing but empty desert stretching to the horizon. The office had one of those bulletproof night windows like you see at gas stations in rough neighborhoods. Behind the glass sat a guy who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, thin, hollow-eyed, wearing a stained white t-shirt. He didn't smile or greet me. He just stared as I walked up, his eyes moving from my car to me and back again. "You traveling alone?" he asked before I could even speak. That should have been enough of a red flag. But I was exhausted, and back then I was used to budget travel and less than perfect accommodations. "Yeah, just passing through," I said. "Need to catch a few hours of sleep before I get back on the road." He didn't ask for ID, didn't want a credit card, just cash. I hesitated, probably visibly, but I was desperate. I dug through my backpack until I found enough crumpled bills and loose change. He slid a key under the glass without a word. Room 12. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a place like that. Dim, musty, stained with decades of questionable use. Brown carpet worn down to the backing in spots. A TV from the Clinton administration bolted to a particle board dresser. The single lamp flickered weakly when I turned it on. I used the bathroom, then some instinct I still can't explain, made me lift the mattress. What I found underneath made my stomach turn. Dark, rust-colored stains, the telltale signs of a serious bedbug infestation. As I dropped the mattress back down, a cockroach the size of my thumb scurried out and disappeared into the shadows. That was enough. I wasn't staying in there another second. I went back to my SUV, locked all the doors, and folded down the back seats to create a makeshift sleeping area in the cargo space. I used my suitcase as a pillow and a pile of clothes as blankets. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt infinitely safer than that room. I must have dozed off for about an hour before a sound woke me. A man's voice, low and conversational. Through the tinted rear windows, I could see the desk clerk standing outside talking on his phone. I couldn't make out much, just fragments. "Still here. Room 12. Lights are off." He hung up and stood there for a moment, looking around like he was expecting someone. Then he walked over to my room, room 12, and unlocked the door. The lights didn't come on. He was inside for maybe a minute, then came back out and slammed the door hard enough to make me jump. But he wasn't alone anymore. Another man had appeared. I hadn't seen him arrive. He must have come from behind the building, or maybe he'd been hiding inside all along. They were both agitated, cursing under their breath. Then the desk clerk started walking toward my SUV. I ducked down, my heart hammering, and grabbed a dark shirt to pull over my head, trying to blend in with the mess of bags and clothes. I heard the door handle rattle. Locked, thank God. Then his face appeared at the window, peering in. The tinted windows and darkness saved me. He couldn't see me huddled in the back, just looked like more luggage and clutter. After what felt like an eternity, he moved away. I didn't wait to see what they'd do next. As quietly as possible, I climbed over the seats to the front, slid the key into the ignition, and fired up the engine. The sound cut through the night silence like a gunshot. Both men turned in surprise, but I was already moving, tires spitting gravel as I peeled out of that lot and back onto the highway. But the most chilling encounter was still to come. It was 2019, and I was working late shifts at an all-night diner just outside Riverside. Down the road from our place sat this decrepit roadside motel, the kind of establishment that attracted only the most desperate travelers. The Sunset Manor, they called it, though the only thing majestic about it was how thoroughly it had fallen apart. For months, the local news had been running stories about a missing woman named Jennifer Martinez. Her photo was plastered on every bulletin board, taped to every storefront window. 28 years old, last seen leaving her apartment complex 3 months earlier. As time passed, people began to give up hope. Some whispered about human trafficking. Others figured she'd simply run away to start over somewhere else. Every night after my shift, I'd drive past that motel on my way home, and every time I'd get this heavy, uneasy feeling in my chest. Something about that place just felt wrong. The way all the curtains stayed perpetually drawn, how the neon vacancy sign flickered constantly but never seemed to attract any normal customers. This particular night, I clocked out around midnight and started my usual drive home. As I approached the motel, something made me slow down. One of the upstairs doors was shaking violently, like someone inside was throwing themselves against it. Then I heard it, a woman's scream that cut through the night air like a blade. At first, I thought it might be a domestic dispute, but the sound wasn't normal. It was frantic, desperate, almost inhuman in its terror. I pulled over and rolled down my windows to listen more closely. The screaming turned to sobbing, then back to yelling, followed by a tremendous crash, like furniture being hurled across a room. A guest from the next room stepped out onto the walkway, looked around nervously, but instead of investigating or helping, he quickly retreated back into his room and locked the door. That reaction chilled me, like he already knew better than to get involved. The longer I sat there, the more wrong everything felt. I was reaching for my phone to call 911 when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, 2 police cruisers pulling into the lot. Someone else had already called it in. I stayed parked as the officers quickly assessed the situation and headed up the external stairs toward the room where the sounds were coming from. Through the thin walls, I could hear shadows moving, voices getting more agitated. The officers pounded on the door and shouted commands. For a few seconds, everything went dead silent. That silence was worse than all the screaming. It made me imagine terrible things happening behind that flimsy wooden door. Then came a tremendous crash as they forced entry. What followed was chaos, boots stomping, men shouting orders, and then cutting through everything else, a woman's voice. She wasn't just crying. She was wailing with relief, sobbing like someone who hadn't made a sound in months. The sound was so raw, so powerful, I could hear it clearly from the parking lot. My stomach dropped as I realized this had to be Jennifer Martinez, the missing woman from all those posters. The next day, the whole town knew. Police had found her alive in that motel room after 3 months of captivity. It was her sister who'd finally provided the tip that led them there, begging officers to check the motel based on information from someone who'd seen her being taken inside. But here's what haunted me most. Neighbors later admitted they'd been hearing screams and cries from that room off and on for weeks. They'd convinced themselves it was just drug addicts or people having loud fights. Nobody wanted to get involved. How many nights had she screamed for help while cars like mine drove past and people like me decided it wasn't their business? The newspaper reported she'd been held in that room for the entire 3 months she'd been missing. I kept imagining what those 4 walls must have looked like. Heavy curtains blocking out the world. Stale air. Maybe the faint sound of highway traffic outside while she sat inside, so close to freedom yet completely invisible. That motel never shut down after Jennifer's rescue. It's still there today, the neon sign still buzzing over that cracked parking lot. I drove by it recently and I found myself slowing down without even realizing it. A chill crawled up my spine as I stared at those perpetually drawn curtains, wondering what other secrets those rooms might be hiding. These experiences changed how I see the world. Horror doesn't always lurk in abandoned mansions or dark forests. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight. In that rundown motel you pass on every road trip, behind those curtains that never seem to open, in the silence that follows a scream in the night. The thing that haunts me most isn't the stalker from my teenage years, or even the trap that was set for me at that desert motel. It's the realization of how many cries for help go unheard, how many people convince themselves that what they're witnessing isn't their responsibility. I think about Jennifer Martinez a lot. 3 months she spent in that room screaming for help while the world drove by outside. 3 months of people hearing her and deciding it was none of their business. 3 months that could have been 3 days or 3 hours if just one person had made that phone call sooner. Now, whenever I'm on the road and something feels off, when that voice in my head whispers that something isn't right, I listen. I don't drive past. I don't convince myself it's not my problem, because the truth is, you never know when you might be someone's only chance. You never know when that scream in the night, that feeling in your gut, that instinct telling you something is wrong, might be the difference between someone making it home safe or disappearing forever. So the next time you're driving past one of those forgotten roadside motels, pay attention. Look for the signs. Listen for the sounds that don't belong. Because horror isn't just something that happens in movies, it's happening right now, behind drawn curtains and locked doors, waiting for someone brave enough to make that call. Don't be the person who drives by. Don't be the person who decides it's not their problem, because sometimes you're all they've got.